Have you ever been watching an mKBHD video and you really wanted to replicate the things that you saw in his video? Well, now you can. Today we're going to look at some plugins from MotionVFX. I've been testing these out for the last month or so, and I'm excited to share this with you guys. There are tons of elements that you can use. In fact, if you look right there, there's more than 50 of them, which include intros, transitions, different features, all of which I'll cover in this video. We're actually going to look at a different pack too. So not only the mKBHD, but we're also going to look at mTutorial and a couple of free ones. So if you stay through the whole video, I'm going to show you how you can download all of those. But instead of just looking at the different things that it has to offer, let's go ahead and see what these plugins involve and how you can implement them in your timeline and add some more production value to your footage. And I even have a promo code for you in the description. In order to access these plugins, we need to come up to Effects. We'll look in our toolbox, and the first thing that we're going to look at are the transitions. So you want to come to MotionVFX and mKBHD, and here's our different transitions. So that was the first transition. Let's take a quick peek at the second transition. I'm going to hold down Alt and click and drag it onto where the other transition was. So this way it replaces what was on the timeline. We'll let this cache and then we'll watch through this one. Now let's say we didn't particularly like that red color there. We can actually modify these transitions. So I'll select the transition in the timeline, come over here, go into shape controls, and here I can change that red to maybe something like this blue here, maybe darken it just a little bit. And then we can let it cache and watch it again. And I actually like that one because it fits better with the theme of this particular video. I'm going to show you one more transition before we move on to something else. So again, I'll come up here, I'll hold down Alt and drag it over our other transition. And again, these are all customizable. So all you have to do is select the transition, come up here. If you want to add the glow or disable the glow, you can uncheck right there. There's a grain option. And of course you have these different colors here. In this particular one, you actually can remove one of the shapes. So if I come back to this transition, let's say we didn't need that white, we can uncheck that. And then now we have an entirely new transition. Under titles, I'm going to hover scrub over the different backgrounds that are included with mKBHD. I'm probably going to repeat this multiple times in this video, but everything is editable and everything is pretty much dynamic. So these aren't just static backgrounds. This is good if you wanted to showcase something, but you didn't want it to just be a plain solid color. Next are the calls to action. So that would include things like this subscribe button right here. And then we have this one, which includes different social media accounts. All those can be adjusted to put your actual name within those accounts. So right now, all we're looking at is that black background, but we can drag this onto our timeline, put it over our clip. All we have to do is come over into the inspector and adjust the position. We're headed over to the features section, and this would be good if you were reviewing a particular type of gear and you wanted to maybe list some of its specs. There's one in there that has a rating system. You may have noticed that all of these come in mKBHD's signature colors, with that being the black, the white, and the red. But what I'm going to do is drag this onto the timeline and make some adjustments. Obviously, I'm going to adjust its location, and I think that I'm going to make an adjustment on some of these colors. Also included are some animations that you could use for some intros. I'll hover scrub over some of these so you can take a look at what they are. This one right here, I'm going to drag into our timeline so we can make some edits. The first thing that I want to talk about is the logo. If we expand that section, first it's set to logo, but we can click on the button for text. And then here, if you didn't have a logo or you preferred not to use it, you can just type out your channel name. However, the other thing we can do is click on logo and then hit browse, That opened a window, I found the logo, and now it put it right into our intro. Underneath the logo, I'm going to change the text. Here, I'm going to change it to post color gear. Here, I'm going to change one of the lines from that red color to a blue color. You may not see it, but if I scroll back to the beginning here, that is when those lines appear. In the background control section, I'm going to change that large line you probably saw before. So I'm going to change that from a red color to more of a yellow-orange color. And we even have a section for those crosses that you see in the background. As with the other things I showed you, you can adjust the color, but you also have an option for adjusting the scale. Additionally, if you wanted to, you could actually adjust the rotation too. And now we can take a look at what that looks like. I think you get the idea now, so let me show you what the lower thirds look like. Here we have some titles. The last couple things we can take a look at in this particular section is what they call tools. So we have this checkbox here. We have a pointer. We have a second pointer, a selection, and an underscore. The next section that we're going to look at is effects. So under toolbox, come down to effects and then mKBHD. For some of these, I recommend that you add an adjustment layer. Sometimes the effects don't function as they should when you apply them directly to the clip. So in certain cases, you want to apply them to an adjustment layer right on top. So the first one I want to show you is this letterbox option right here. I'll drag that right onto our adjustment clip and we can see what that does. And then we have that nice letterbox effect. Let's grab another effect and drag it onto our adjustment clip. And this one is the zoom effect. You can see the curve that it uses to zoom in on the footage. Now this may be a bit much, so what I'll do is choose the zoom amount and lower that a little bit. And then we can watch through this and see what it does. One of the exceptions to adding it to an adjustment layer is this option up here called additional footage. Let me drag this footage on top of our other footage and then drag this right onto our top layer. So now you'll notice if I scrub through here, that footage that we put on the top is now composited onto our other footage. Clearly that doesn't look too great right now, but what we can do obviously is come in here and we can adjust the scale and then move it to a different position if we need to. And if you didn't like the color of these crosses, you could come in here and adjust that, and you can also adjust their thickness. And this is what it looks like. So while we're in effects, let's take a look at mTutorial. As I did before, the first thing I'm going to do is drag an adjustment clip onto our timeline. And then I'm going to drag one of these options up here. So you have that option there where you can draw focus to something that you're explaining. Obviously that's not showing anything at the moment. We can come over to content, maybe adjust the location. And then now for screen captures like this, where it may be hard to see what we're doing or where the focus is, we have that additional animation which will adjust our focus. Another focus effect that we can look at is this one right here. I'll drag this onto our adjustment layer, which I placed on top of our footage. As you'll notice, it dims out the rest of the screen. It gives that blue wash of color, and it focuses on something very specific that you want to bring attention to, and you can add text underneath. So I can come over here and potentially move this down. adjust the scale. And then if this, of course, isn't specifically something that we want to say, we can type whatever we want in there. Pretty self-explanatory, but I think this is nice. So this really diverts your attention from the rest of the footage and focuses your attention right in this box. We also have these other options that pretty much do similar things. For example, we have this one here where you could highlight something in yellow. As with everything else in these packs, it's dynamic. So obviously it's not just going to be a yellow circle. You'll notice it grows, highlights the area that you want, and then retracts back. The last one I wanted to show you before we move on is this one. The thing I really like about this one is how it functions. You have this magnifying glass animation, which I'll show you in a little bit. Plus, whatever's in this circle here, it zooms in that part of the footage. By the way, if you didn't want to adjust the controls over here, you could come down to the bottom left of the viewer, go into Fusion Overlay, and then you can just make your adjustments here. So if you needed to move it up, or you needed to move it into a different direction, you could adjust it that way without needing to use the controls in the inspector under Effects. Underneath our focus options, we have things called placeholders. Now, you may find different ways that you can use these particular plugins, but what I envision these being used for best is if you were to make a course. Now, for something like this, you'll notice that it brings down the footage to the corner. What you can do here is have something on the timeline underneath it. So that may be good for somebody that's trying to walk you through something so you can see them in the bottom right-hand corner, and the actual screen recorded footage you can put beneath it. So initially our footage would start out full size, and then it would slowly get smaller. We'd bring it down there, and the name of the person would come up here. Of course, you don't necessarily have to type that there, and you can remove that text if you wanted to, but I think it's great that they included it. So moving on from effects, we're going to go back up to titles, but instead of mKBHD, we're going to come to mTutorial. The first thing that we're going to look at are these backgrounds right here. And I'm actually going to drag this into our timeline. And we're going to head back up to where we have our add-ons. So this one right here, we have a mouse. Now remember, these are two different assets. We have a background that we put on there. We can change that, of course, to a different background. And we have this option for the mouse. Let me stop this animation right here. We can come up to the content controls. We can make the adjustments, animation controls. Now in this case, I actually like that the color is a blue because it fits with the background. If you wanted to indicate to somebody that they had to left click, you can uncheck right click. And this is just a good way to explain to someone in a visual way of what they need to do next without adding some text. Over here, we have some guides if we need them. Down here, we have some lower thirds. Now, for some people, these may not be as exciting as you may have saw with something like the mKBHD. But of course, depending on what you're producing, you have these options here in case you didn't want to be as flashy. Underneath the lower thirds, we have some miscellaneous. This would be for something, as I alluded to before, if you were selling a course, you could list the price here. If you were selling a product, you could use this also. A lot of these are self-explanatory, but you'll notice as I hover scrub over some of these, the different options that you have. Underneath the miscellaneous, we have pointers. We have this nice arrow right here, which I think is great because what I've done in the past is actually animate my own. I had to download some from the internet and then have to composite it on top of the footage, but it's nice to have this option right here. We have things like this, which can point to a particular part of your footage. We have this right here. Right now it says toggle this option on. Obviously, you can adjust the text to say whatever you need it to say. Underneath the pointers, we have a list of 17 different titles. So the titles look something like this. As with everything else, this is all customizable. So if you didn't like a particular color scheme or text, you can make those adjustments. The last thing that we're going to look at for mTutorial are the transitions. I'm going to actually change to a different timeline so we can take a look at those. So I'm going to take this top one and drag it in between our clips here, and we can watch through it. If we didn't like that one in particular, we can just choose this one. I'm going to Alt drag, and we can watch through that. And of course, if that's too quick, we can just come up here and adjust the frames. We have that option there. That option there. And that one there. You may have noticed that this one has text on top of it. So I may have not covered everything in both of those packs, but you may have noticed that there are a lot of options in there that you have to choose from. But as I mentioned early on, there are a couple that are free that you can play with now. So let's take a quick look at those, and obviously I will link everything in the description below. The first free plugin we're going to look at is mVertical. So I'm going to drag that right on top of our footage. This looks similar to the blanking effect that is actually already built into Resolve, but you have a lot more options. I'm going to head over to Effects. Right now we have the option for scale, which is essentially what the one in Resolve does. You also have this option for mirror and copy. Similar to the other effects that we looked at today, we have the position where you can move this. I actually like it right down the middle. You can increase the scale of this and you can rotate it. You also have these options here to adjust the brightness and the saturation if you wanted to. I don't necessarily want to do that. I'd prefer to maybe color grade it separately. But just in case you don't want to make those adjustments by accident, you can uncheck this. And then now, even if you were to adjust these, nothing would happen. If we come under background controls, same thing. We can move the background around if we want to. Now, if we're under scale, this copy spread doesn't do anything for obvious reasons. If we choose mirror, we can now adjust this and we can position how we want those to show up. And for the copy, again, we can adjust where those appear in the background. In regards to the options relating to color and Luma, I would probably use those for background controls more than I would, as I mentioned before, for the actual footage. So let's say I wanted to bring down the brightness a little bit, or more realistically, I want to bring down the saturation. Let me adjust the background fade so you can see what that's doing. And I think that looks pretty good. So for those that may not be familiar, what this is essentially doing is instead of just seeing your footage with the black background on either side, you can now have a blurred out, scaled up version of it on either side. And then we end up with the result like this. So your focus is still on the footage in the middle, but now we have something more pleasing to look at on either side. Another free plugin that we're going to look at is this M Transition Luma. Initially, I wasn't overly impressed because this is a typical Luma fade, where it fades using the brightness of the footage to determine how to transition to the next footage. However, there are tons of controls that we can adjust. So for example, if I come over to transition controls, instead of using the highlights to transition to the next one, I can use the shadows. So essentially what that means is the darkest parts of the footage, such as that tree, will be the first to transition to the next footage, and the brightest parts back here will be the last. Of course, we could adjust that mask. Instead of the footage A, which is the one on the left here, into the new footage, we can choose footage B. So now the darkest part of that footage will come through first. And that, of course, being her pants and her hair. So that will be the first thing that you see as you transition into that new footage. We can adjust the softness. We can choose the curve that's used. So whether or not it's smooth or how smooth it is to transition from one to the other, we have all these options here. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but essentially the farther down you go, the more of an impact that it has. We had this option down here for desaturation amount. So if we check this box for desaturation, right now I'm looking at the desaturated footage, but that's only when we're making the transition from one to the other. But again, if we think that's too intense and we don't want it totally desaturated, we can come in here and adjust this a little bit. So that way the saturation only dips a little bit in between the two pieces of footage. We have this option here for pixelate if that's something that we want to add to the footage. Different shapes, we can either use square or hexagon, triangle if we wanted to. There's this option here for sweep. And we can adjust the angle down here. We have this option for halftone. And it might be more obvious over here. So if I adjust the size, now we can adjust the radius. And then the angle if we wanted to move that around. And this last option at the bottom is border. So I'm going to check on that and you'll notice what impact that has. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be this white color right here. We could come in here and potentially change that to something like yellow. And then we have essentially the same effect. Once again, if that's too impactful and we want to transition a little easier from our footage to that border, we can adjust the softness. So as I mentioned before, this is very similar to a Luma Fade, of course, which is why it's called what it's called, but you have a lot more options than you would in any other effect that does the same thing. And the last thing we're going to look at today is something called mKBHD, and this one's pretty interesting. If we put this on our footage, we can come over to Effects, and now if we wanted to maybe focus on a different part of our footage, we can make it more dynamic in the sense that, let's say I wanted to pan this a little bit and tilt it a little bit to the side. We have the option to roll if we wanted to. We have this option to zoom out. It also includes this option here, sharpen, which is nice because when you're zooming in on your footage, sometimes, as you know, it can become a little bit pixelated or a little bit soft. So this sharpen option will help with that. We also have this option back here. Obviously, if we're going to rotate this footage around, it's going to show what's behind it. So they've thought of that, and you have this option here for background controls. So let's say we didn't want this particular gray to gray gradient. So I can do something like this, where maybe I can click on this color here, and then we can maybe adjust it to, let's say, this color right there. And then on this side, if I wanted to adjust it to potentially a lighter color, I could do that. As you'll notice, there are tons of things that you can adjust here. I'm actually not going to cover this particular effect in this video today, but this one's free, so go ahead and download it and have a play with it. And by the way, if you're curious about what some of these effects do more in detail, you can check the link in my description below. That will send you right to the website. Some of my creator friends are involved. Patrick actually records some of the voiceovers for the MotionVFX YouTube channel. And my other Resolve friend, Mr. Alex Tech, has done some reviews of some of these effects also, including the mKBHD. So of course, you know where to go. Check the description below to check out everything that I mentioned. Thanks for watching. I highly recommend that you download some of those free plugins and have a play. So if you're a YouTuber or an aspiring YouTuber, I can definitely recommend these plugins. Why not check out one of the videos that YouTube recommends on your screen right now? And I'll see you in the next video.